I'm Festante, and this presentation is really about how Windows 10 is kind of moving to the modern era of operating systems, and how you went from a Windows 8.1 or a Windows 7 deployment to how Windows 10 is moving on to MDM. So, who has deployed iOS and Android today? Any Windows Phone 8.1's deployments? Couple, right? Small. Well, Windows 10 is really changing on how we're looking at operating systems. So when you go from iOS, Android for work, or Windows 10, from one single pane of glass, it's a nice, easy way to manage your devices. But before we start, just want to set the stage for where Windows has been, specifically for Windows 7 and those Windows 8.1 deployments, or Windows XP. It was at the top stage. That's the old enterprise way for the architectures, where it's set up by the administrator, it's given to the employee, and then, it's all set up, and security is based off of what the administrator wants you to have. But it's very closed, right? I give you my device. It's a corporate device. I don't get choice as a user of what I want to use and what I want to do. The new enterprise architecture, you've been deploying it for iOS and for Android probably for a couple of years now. From a MobileIron perspective, Windows 10 is our big first stage in there. We have a lot of Windows Phone 8.1 deployments, but Windows 10 is kind of setting that stage for the broader scale. Having those laptops, those desktops, those things that James is probably talking about in the other presentation if you caught it. But instead of a device-centric, where I'm closing down that access, the user has a choice in Windows 10. So if they want to bring Windows 10 in the enterprise, you have the capabilities to do that. The agenda for today is going to be all about the start of the process. Going to bring a little pain on how you're currently probably deploying Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 desktop solutions. I call it the struggle. The second part is going to be, how do you go from the struggle to a modern deployment? So the out-of-box experience for Windows 10 and the different enrollment types. The third one is going to go into the applications. So going from Win32 applications to a universal Windows platform, and has that changed the model from a deployment perspective. And then lastly, deployment considerations. This presentation is not going to say, go from GPOs to MDM right this very second. There's a lot of things that GPOs can do today that MDM will get there. So you have to look at the different deployment considerations. On to the struggle. How many people have an SCCM or LANDESK deployment? Okay. So managing one OS image probably isn't the norm. It's probably 10, 15. You have to have that golden copy in order for you to, migrate that operating system, or to convert that operating system to something that I can use as a user. And in that operating system, you have your Windows updates, your patches that I want to get ready for my golden copy, and then all the applicable programs that are used for that desktop, right? It's a very administrator-centric way to deploy a Windows 7 deployment or Windows 8.1. So not just one, could be dozens, it could be hundreds, depending on where the geos are, what their users are, what they're doing. They may have different applications to support what they're doing in the enterprise. Not every business unit is the same. So you may have different operating systems, different golden copies. And the second step, well, then I need to modify the provisioning template. In order for me to provision it, I need to set up the template so it's ready to deploy. Then you need to go in through the configure join domain action, because how many people do a workplace join on Windows today? Nobody. It's all domain join. Then I need to install an agent. And then I need to put in the product key for Windows, right? When I put in that product key, that's going to be my enterprise licensing that I use for Windows. So I need to put that before I deploy that operating system. And then when I get a template ready to go, I need to select all of the devices that I want to enroll with. So the first step, I need a computer name. I need to put in the destination MAC address. So how do I know which computer should be getting the right operating system or should be getting upgraded? And then I need to do it for every device. Rinse and repeat. Going through that workflow, going through that step. It's a very, like I said, keep on saying it, IT-centric approach. Administrator needs to do all of these steps in order for you to just deploy Windows into the enterprise. And when I get all of that ready to go, I then need to touch that one computer that needs to be used. So I set up all on the IT side. Now we need to physically go to this computer and set it up to boot. So I need the two things that I need to enable the PXE boot, go through the BIOS, make sure that's enabled. Then I need network access to that server that has that template that I configured. So that means it has to be on the corporate network. What happens if you have users around the world? Do you set it up and then hand it to them? Because if they don't have access to it, they have to have a corporate VPN access to it. It's not at that stage because it's not managed yet, not deployed. So it's a chicken and egg kind of story. Does that kind of resonate with you guys? Is that a typical deployment? Good, no BS, swear, just wanted to go through it. On to the struggle, right? You see the IT administrator picture, has a phone, has a server underneath them, has a little wrench. Onto the enterprise. And when you get domain join, you have a traditional VPN to access all of my enterprise data. That traditional VPN, I need to be around the world, right? And I need to be domain joined. So at the end of the day, when the IT is setting it up, they have to touch it, right? They're going to be touching that device and handing it to you in order for you to access it. That means that from a user point of view, there's a lot of people touching it, which means a high cost for the enterprise. There is no, you guys don't have a workplace joined. You can't just hand somebody a Windows device if you're using domain join and just say go. You need to have those credentials in order for you to access your enterprise. Onto the modern deployment. If you've deployed Windows Phone 8.1, you've seen a little bit of how MDM can do it. They're taking a lot from Windows Phone 8.1, taking some things from Windows 8.1, and adding on to it for Windows 10. MDM Enrollment is the standard way to do it that we've done for Windows 8.1 and Windows Phone 8.1, and it's moved into Windows 10. Azure AD is the new kid on the block. So Azure AD enables you, if you're using Office 365, how many people are? Anybody? We're moving to Office 365. Microsoft wants you to do that as soon as possible, right? So if you're using Azure Active Directory, you can integrate and join your computer, your user, to Azure Active Directory, as opposed to the device. Last one is Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer. That's your bulk way to do it. So that bulk way is if I'm using a kiosk mode or assigned access or ways to kind of make it where it's not really the end user, but I still want to get it deployed as soon as possible, so multiple hundreds, thousands, this is what you would use for a bulk provisioner. James showed you a little bit for the IoT stuff, but this is also the way that you could do it for desktop and laptops. And that uses the MDM flow. So option 1, the out-of-box experience for Windows 10. If you went through Windows 10 from a fresh install, you're going to get prompted with, do you have an Azure Active Directory account? If you have one, say yes. And when you get prompted, say, is this a company device or is this my own personal one? And that changes the policies depending on what you're doing for MDM, for Azure Active Directory. So when I put in my corporate credentials, I'm authenticating to Azure Active Directory. MobileIron has an application that communicates to Azure Active Directory, and I get all of my policies and configs. And the only thing I had to do was put in my corporate credentials. So I no longer need to set some things up as an administrator and hand it to you. I can just hand you a Windows 10 desktop, laptop, and say, have at it. Since this is a technical conference, wanted to talk a little bit more about how it actually works. On the left-hand side for desktop, I have an Azure Active Directory join. When I put in those corporate credentials, I actually am registering my device to Microsoft's cloud, to Azure Active Directory. Once I register that device, MobileIron has an integration, it's an Azure application inside Azure, that I then send and extract that device ID in order for MobileIron to do the correlation between Azure Active Directory and MobileIron. So you're technically registered in both places. I saw some hands about Windows Phone 8.1 enrollment. This is what I call the MDM enrollment, where you put in your user credentials, and it goes based off of an enterprise enrollment DNS record, and it sees that it's available on core cloud. And I could put in my Active Directory credentials, or my PIN, or however you set it up for Windows 10. This is more of the classic way that is done, that you could, if you're going from Windows Phone 8.1 or Windows 8.1, you could transition easily to Windows 10. And if you're not using Azure Active Directory, this would be your best way to do it. For option 3, everyone likes bulk provisioning, right? Well, for those kiosk modes, you can set up a Windows image. And in that Windows image, I could put in that provisioning package for that user account that should be registered to MobileIron. And in that provisioning package, it'll just be an MDM enrollment. I put in my credentials, email address, put in my password, goes right through. But these are really for your non-users, your kiosk modes, your assigned accesses, those that wouldn't be very user-centric. So I said everything about the enrollment. Well, what can Windows 10 do, and Windows 10 MDM do? Some tools to do it. So on the security side, you could absolutely set passcodes, whether they're, complex or PIN or however you set it. It's based off your company policy. Access control. So with the Azure AD join, didn't mention it, but you have what we call Azure conditional access with Windows 10. So if that device is compliant, then they'll be able to access, Exchange Online or SharePoint Online or any of the applications that you support with Azure Active Directory. Device syncing, right? If I push an application, how do I know that that device is syncing and I can get all of the current updates? For lockdown, GPOs do a ton of lockdowns, right? For an MDM perspective, You could lock down things like the Cortana or the Microsoft Store. A lot of granularity in the MDM approach. Not quite there with GPOs. I mean, you can't do every hook and ladder with it, but absolutely you can. And actions for compliance. On Windows 10, you have the application management where it can be the hybrid approach that I call for Windows 10 for desktops, where you have Windows 32 applications and you have modern applications. And they're different architectures. And with MDM, you could essentially push both. So Win32 applications, they could be in-house applications if they're in-house modern applications, or they could be Win32. So your MSIs of the world. Provisioning. Windows Defender, and malware and virus software is very big for the hybrid side of Windows 10, right? You can control that with Windows Defender. Always turn that on, and the user won't be able to remove it. For application blacklist, you have, I could blacklist applications from running with AppLocker. Those are both Windows 32 and Modern App Store. So I could not allow Firefox or Notepad to run, and I could block my ESPN app from running in the Windows Store. And it also brings updates, right? If you have a WSUS server that's for Windows 10 or that you've used for Windows 7 or Windows 8.1 in SCCM or LANDESK, you could point to the same server and you can configure and schedule updates depending on when the user should update and force them to or send them off to where they should be. And you could say go to Windows Update or go exclusively to my server. And to make it easier, you have configuration. So there is a default email client on Windows 10. It's not called Outlook. You can push an Exchange ActiveSync profile down to it and configure email. And then Wi-Fi, certificates, VPN. James will say use ECC. So we went through modern deployment. Now we're going to talk a little about Windows applications. And what does a Windows application mean for Win32 modern apps? How many people love installing Windows 32 apps? It's great, right? You install an application, you get all of the registry settings in there, and you worry about if I ever want to install it or uninstall it, does all of it leave? So after time, your applications get slower as you add more, or just slower after time, because they're all a shared resource for Windows 32. At the Build conference, the number one thing that Microsoft is trying to push is moving people away from a Windows 32 approach to their universal Windows platform. And because of that, it has a lot of those different things. So if I have a Windows 32 application privilege is a real problem. The great thing about Windows is that it's so flexible that it gives you the possibility to do a lot of cool things. The bad thing about Windows is that it gives you or unlocks the keys to everything. And when it comes down to, I said about uninstalling and installing, how do I know where to go to for Windows 32 apps? So patching and updates, I have to go into the browser and go to that company's website to download a new upgrade or get a new program from some website that I'm pretty sure it's valid, but I'm not certain that is. There is no trusted storefront, no trusted place for me to go to get everything that I need. So the result is higher security risk because they have a higher privileges for applications that are running. DL hell that we've always kind of said where it's a shared resource and registry, everything goes for it. This is Microsoft's answer. This is their one platform to rule them all. So if you are deploying, PC applications, they shouldn't be different than mobile. They could have a different look and feel, but the core of it for Windows 10 should be the same. So by deploying a universal Windows platform, I could publish this application on my thing, or it could be a PC, it could be an Xbox, it could even be a HoloLens. So all of these can run even though it's the same application. I develop it once, and I never have to go to different platforms. It's all one platform, all one way. And the beauty of it, it's a sandbox approach. Sandbox applications for the modern App Store. You still have Windows 32 applications, but it's an open file system where it's an unprotected kernel. Your registry is all shared. They could all talk and communicate with each other. There is no way to kind of block that access. For the modern apps, that's where you have the sandbox approach. The universal Windows platform is that next step. If you've used iOS and Android, sandbox apps are nothing new. But for Windows 10, this is where they want to go. So I gave you all the great things about MDM, what you could do with it. How do you actually deploy it? What should you be looking at when you deploy it? This isn't even a MobileIron thing. This is if you are looking at Windows 10 and you want to move to the enterprise, to move to a modern operating system with sandboxing apps, Microsoft came out with what they call Project Centennial. And it's a tool to convert your Windows 32 applications and .NET to Universal Windows Platform. This is the first iteration. It's just they're testing, but there's going to be a lot of iterations of it because they want you to go to the Universal App Store. They want you to go to the Microsoft Store to be that trusted storefront. And this presentation isn't about switching your GPOs with EMM. It's actually a layered approach. If you have GPOs in place today for SCCM or LANDESK, EMM brings a little bit on top of that. There's some considerations that you should be looking at too, though. You shouldn't be pushing down the same Wi-Fi configurations or security settings or lockdown policies from GPO to EMM. My advice would be look at your GPO policies, and if you're pushing down Wi-Fi's or certificates, MDM is a better approach for providing certificates. There's a lot more integrations there. So there's some look and feel that you could do for Wi-Fi, exchange profiles, things to make it easier so I have a single pane of glass. But GPOs are still they've been around for about 10, 15 years. There's still a lot of different hooks that you could have with that. But it doesn't exclude you from having EMM on top of GPOs. And if you're migrating to Office 365, a topic that's near and dear to my heart, it just makes it easier to do Azure Active Directory. So EMM is the better approach for Office 365. SCCM doesn't have the integration for things like compliance actions based off of my device. If the device is compliant or not, MobileIron has an integration with Office 365, with Azure Active Directory rather, to report that compliance. And then when it reports that compliance to Azure Active Directory, it sees if I should have access or not. And then if my device is not compliant, it's going to allow or disallow that access. So whether you're using GPOs or not, Azure Active Directory should be your look if you're moving to Office 365. And MobileIron makes it easier to just enroll into it. And I put up this grainy slide because I like it the most. This is our sales infrastructure that we use here at MobileIron. And the amount of devices that are on it are kind of varying, right? The single pane of glass to manage my iOS devices with my Android, whether they're pre-Lollipop or Android for work, or my Surface Pros. Like having that single pane of glass for an administrator and moving forward is really the future of where management and security should be.